I'm currently the managing director and nominated individual at a company called Park Homes, which is mainly in the north of England and Scotland. Having spent 12 years of my life happily at CQC, latterly as the head of inspection for London. Then I moved to HC1 and then more recently to Park Homes.
Amazing. Thank you, Anthony. We're so pleased to have you with us. We know how busy everybody is as well on this call. So thank you very, very much for making time to join today. As I said, just for those that have just joined, if we can keep the cameras off and stay on mute during the session, just to help everything run smoothly. But you're very, very welcome to submit questions in the Q&A box at any point. By the Q&A box, I mean the chat function. And then hopefully we'll have enough time to get through them. I've allowed 45 minutes for Anthony and I to have a bit of a chat, and then hopefully that will give enough time for questions. But if there are questions that we don't get round to, we'll make a note of them, get a response, and then send it out. You will also note that this webinar is being recorded. It's for the purposes of people who haven't been able to attend, but also so that you have a point of reference for after this call, because I know that Anthony will have some really interesting insights. As I've said, today's session is a fireside chat. It's not a presentation, but we will be unpacking a really important question, actually, and I think one that's really timely, which is what does good look like in dementia care under the CQC's evolving framework? With the single assessment framework still bedding in and the CQC's dementia strategy on the horizon, changes to CQC itself, many providers are asking, how do we best evidence what really matters, personalised, meaningful care that improves quality of life? And a lot of you are right front and centre in making that happen for your residents and for their families and carers who have entrusted you with their care for their loved ones. So today we're going to explore what the single assessment framework means in real world practice, how to strengthen your evidence base ahead of inspection, and how different interventions, different innovations are being used to evidence quality, including digital tools that make best practice easier to deliver and document. So some of you may have had a bit of interaction with Brain Plus before, but Brain Plus is a health tech company based in Denmark, and we have a digital tool that's been designed to enable health and care providers to deliver cognitive stimulation therapy more easily for providers, but also for residents to benefit from the delayed cognitive decline that the evidence base for cognitive stimulation therapy suggests, which is 4 to 6 months. However, that is not the focus of today's conversation, but it's just so you know what we do and who we are. So with all this in mind, and because I'm aware that I've been doing a lot of talking, first of all, Anthony, I think it would be really beneficial for those who are uninitiated, but just generally to give your take on the context and background to the CQC's approach to regulation. We know that they've been through a number of changes. We also know that they introduced a single assessment framework. So, but why now? Like, why does it feel timely to have this conversation now?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I mean, we all know the situation that we kind of face ourselves in with CQC at the minute. But if you just go back a bit, because I guess I have the benefit or misfortune, which way to look at it, that I worked at CQC when I first joined CQC back in 2011. Actually, it went through the same mess that it's currently in, and it wasn't until Sir David Behan came in as the chief exec to rescue it and turn it into the credible regulatory body it was. So I've kind of been through this wheel before, where the regulators had this hiatus, and I think that the whole history of CQC up until COVID was around about two things, and predominantly it was about meeting a set of regulatory standards, the regulations in the Health and Social Care Act that you're all so familiar with, that once upon a time were called the fundamental standards, because they should just be there all the time. And then when the ratings were brought in, which was brought in around about, I can't remember exactly, but 2013, 2014, and the ratings program was designed deliberately to drive up quality. And so you ended up with this two-pronged approach around ratings driving up quality and trying to drive quality improvement through a set of ratings characteristics. This is what you do to get to good, and then a set of fundamental regulatory standards in the regulations, which is the compliance angle. And so I think that even when I was just about to leave CQC, which was kind of the early part of 2020, there were conversations about how do we do that quite differently, because I certainly inspected hundreds of care homes and took, as a head of inspection, I took significant enforcement against numbers of providers. And and I think one of the frustrations is that, of course, the old inspection framework was very much based about evidence and pieces of paper. I mean, I'm being really simplified there, but it was about, is the evidence there of this? Is there an audit there? Is there this there? Is there that there? And although there was always elements about the people's experience in the homes, it wasn't right at the forefront. And I think that that's why CQC did need to change. And of course, then they had other challenges, their IT challenges and the IT platform, and the rest is history and COVID, etc. So, but what we do know is that CQC have got their act together. They've got a new chief exec in Sir Julian Hartley, who I had the pleasure of listening to a couple of weeks ago. They've got a whole new team in there, delivering the change right at the top. They, more importantly, they have a chair that was a previous chief inspector, the new chair of the board, and so it's now getting back to where it should be. And we're already seeing, and you're probably seeing it in your homes, that we are seeing an increase in inspection volume. And therefore that's why this is now timely, because the and we'll talk about the new framework, I'm sure, shortly, but the new framework is about the interactions with people, and therefore that's why it's a really kind of timely conversation, I think, at the moment, Fee, because I think CQC will come back, and once they do, because as I said, I've got the benefit of seeing it before. Obviously, things may have slipped in certain homes since they were last back. Some requires improvement homes are still not being inspected for up to 5 years. So have they improved? Have they slipped backwards? Are some of the good homes that haven't been inspected for years and years, have they slipped backwards? So we expect, potentially there's a lot more enforcement on the horizon from CQC and things. So it's a really timely conversation.
And I think it's really interesting if you think about, to your point around COVID. So correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a regulatory inspector, but my understanding is that the single assessment framework was introduced in 2022. So there will be homes that have actually not been presumably inspected under the single assessment framework. What is your take on the SAF? What do you think the intention is behind it, and how is it being received by providers, both those going through the inspection and those giving thought to how they prepare for what could be their first?
Yeah, and you're right, Pete. The design of the single assessment framework actually started before I left CQC in 2020. And it was then introduced, as you say, in 2022. And there were numerous iterations of pilots and stuff to go through there. Just to kind of remind everybody that in CQC, prior to the single assessment framework, there were multiple assessment frameworks. There was one for adult social care, there was one for domiciliary care, there was one for the NHS trusts, there was a different type for independent health, there was one for dental services, there's one for general practice. So multiple assessment frameworks. And I think that as the kind of political economic structures came together around integrated health and social care through ICBs and stuff, which obviously still got a long way to go in social care. But the idea was, if the system is integrated, therefore how we can't have different assessment frameworks for different parts of that health and social care system. They all need to be assessed in the same way. And right at the heart of that needs to be the person that uses the service. And so that's the genesis of the single assessment framework. There were also some cost efficiencies in how to do that, because then you could share inspectors across, because you didn't have to retrain them in different frameworks and so forth. But that's kind of being rolled back on anyway now. But I think that how it's being received, I think, is interesting. And you guys may well have had some experience of that yourselves. But I think that a lot of providers, and I'm told by ex-colleagues in CQC, a lot of providers are not familiar with the quality statements that underpin the single assessment framework, and they're also not familiar about some of the preparatory work they could have done about how CQC will evidence those quality statements around observation, around looking at how teams work together, getting the experience and feedback of people's experience and their relatives and so forth. And a lot of providers haven't prepared themselves for that particularly well. Uh, I think there's a mixed view, I think, in provider land. I know some of the big providers are absolutely furious about some of their results. Some of the smaller providers have had really good results. In my organization, for example, under the SAF, I've achieved 4 goods. So it's worked for us because we did the preparatory work about how to evidence it. And I think that's again why this is a timely conversation, particularly around dementia.
So I'm sure that I'm going to be preempting the next question from the audience, which is, what does that preparatory work look like?
So let's talk about one of the key things that CQC inspectors will look at, and that's their observation of the practice in the home. Okay, so some of you will be aware that CQC had a tool many years ago that was designed at the University of Bradford, called the SOFI tool. There's the short observational framework for inspection. And that tool was used to observe the interactions with people with dementia largely. Okay. But the idea of that was to actually understand how many times do people interact with the resident and does it make a difference to them? So things have moved on. And in the new single assessment framework, that's a core thing. We can expect our inspectors to do far more observation because in each of the quality statements, the observation element is significant in most of them and has a very significant weighting in terms of the scoring. So, and when you go and ask managers and senior teams that or quality teams that go in your homes and you ask them, well, how long did you sit and observe what was going on? And actually, quite often the answer comes back, well, not very often. And actually, go and sit down in a lounge, in a dining room, in a corridor, whatever, and just sit and watch. And CQC trained inspectors are trained to listen, watch, and smell. And those 3 things can tell you an awful lot. But just by watching and listening, it's absolutely fascinating. So I remember when I was at HC1, and Joe is on this call, will remember, we introduced an observational framework, and a lot of the senior director teams that were looking across the homes it was absolutely mind blowing to them because they said we've been going in this home for months, years, quite often, but we never sat and watched. And you can then start to see that residents actually they're very not spoken to very often. There's no interaction with them, and that's what we've really got to prepare for. So, and it's not just the traditional kind of activities program that does bingo or listen to Vera Lynn in the afternoon, or when I was an inspector you used to walk into homes and every morning everybody there was sat watching Jeremy Kyle. That shows you how long ago that was. But and it was just a standing joke because that's what you saw all the time. That's not interaction. Interaction isn't, it can just be saying hello to somebody. It could be smiling at someone as they walk past a corridor, down a corridor. All of that stuff really matters because actually, if you don't do that, that manifests itself in stress and distress behaviors, particularly for people with dementia at any stage. So imagine being sat in a home and nobody interacts with you apart from putting a plate down for you at lunchtime or doing a task to you like taking you to the bathroom or helping you to bed, but that's it. Nobody talks to you, nobody smiles at you, nobody just brushes past and grabs your hand and say you all right. you know those things really matter. And imagine if that was you. I'd get quite frustrated actually. And then if you can't express yourself properly,
Mm.
then you're going to get very, very frustrated, aren't you? So my big takeaway here is do some observational work. You don't need a fancy tool. You could just sit there for half an hour and just clock how many times the staff or anybody actually has an interaction with a group of residents. And I can guarantee, even in outstanding homes, you'll be gobsmacked how few those interactions can be sometimes.
That's so interesting what you're describing, but it sounds quite cultural, actually, like the
Mm.
culture of being busy. I think I've mentioned to a number of you who are on this call, my mum was the manager of a nursing home, and the culture was being busy, and it's not because you don't want to do that, but because you feel like you don't have the time to do that, or you don't have the space to do that. In your view, what are good examples of evidence in creating that culture of observation, of watch, listen, smell, and that have resonated with inspectors under the new framework? Are there
So
specific cultural things?
yeah, I mean, there's kind of things like tools you could use. You could create your own little observational framework and stuff, so you can actually show an inspector that you're monitoring the interactions with people. That goes down really, really well because that's how they've been trained with the Sophie tool, particularly the inspectors who've been around a while. Um, so you can say that that's actually part of my audit, my governance system is actually the experience that the resident is having. And I'm monitoring that and looking at that. You can also evidence about things like what if you have flash meetings during the day or huddles or you have staff meetings, whatever they are, you can actually talk about how we interact with residents. I mean, I once brought a smiling coach in to teach people how to smile, and people thought I was mad. But actually, smiling makes the staff feel better, and it makes the resident feel a lot better because it's infectious. But sometimes, if you're in a task orientated situation, people don't smile.
Mm,
The other big thing is, I think that has gone down really well with inspectors. I think is that we do a lot of training in the care sector, and all of you will do training differently. Some of you will do a lot of face-to-face training. Some of you will buy your training on an e-learning platform, whatever you do. The thing we don't train anybody in is how to have a conversation. And I'm gobsmacked sometimes about how, and particularly with people with dementia, people do not know how to have a conversation with people. And some people can do it naturally. Some people are shy and nervous about having a conversation, but some people just, I always remember a fantastic carer a year or so ago who was talking to me, and she said, Anthony, she said, I've been doing this job for 10 years, and I think I can talk to most of the residents, but the people with dementia, even if it's mild dementia, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And my e-learning dementia training has not prepared me for that. And I thought, yeah, you don't know how to have the conversation, you know.
mm,
And it can be really daunting for people that. Um, and this is something, though, if you look back, this is something the learning disability world does amazingly. I had the pleasure of going to an LD provider only about 6 months ago to do a little bit of work with them, and they train people in having conversations, and about how to have conversations with individual people, not these group of people have got dementia, and this is how you have a
mm,
conversation. No, but this is Doris, this is Margaret, this is John, this is Fred. This is what their life's about, and this is what you can talk to them about, whether they've got dementia or not. And if you do that, you then hit right on the nail in the single assessment framework, the personalized care element,
yeah,
because
I
everybody thinks, you guys accepted, I am sure. But when you talk to people about what's personalized care, they think it's personalized care planning. It's writing a care plan around that person. That's only a small element in my view. That's the starting point of getting to know that person. And I think a lot of the care sector doesn't do that well in care planning, I have to be honest. including my own organisation. We've do a lot more work around that. But actually, personalised care is talking to people, interacting with people. That's what personalised care is. You know.
Yeah,
Um,
I guess it would be interesting if you are able to kind of share a little bit about what that training looks like. What are the core components? I know, again, from experience of working in learning disability services, it is about really getting to know that person, really understanding what they like, what they don't like, being really mindful of some of the interactions that aren't being said, actually, body language, all of those sorts of things. Are there any sort of really core components that you could tell our audience today, that kind of give a hint of what that training looks like?
yeah, very much so. And I think you've kind of stolen my thunder a little bit there, Fee, with that, because I think that's the element. It's how well do you know that person, and but you can walk in, and as an inspector, I would walk into care homes and I'd talk to staff about, say, so there's Joan Smith in room 10. Tell me about her. And I'd get, oh well, yeah, she's 92. She's a bit fussy about this kind of food. She's got a daughter, and that might be it. And and
Mm.
and to a lot of people, that's enough knowledge. That's not enough knowledge if you want to interact with people and deliver personalized care. You should know that person inside out. I walked into a home not so long ago, not from my provider, but another provider, where they had got a recent, you know, internal assessment they've done themselves, and they rated
We're not
themselves
going to
outstanding,
life.
which always worries me.
And then you're
And
in.
Sorry,
so,
Yeah.
Anthony.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, okay, it's fine.
okay, and I walked in there, and they said we know these staff, these residents inside out. The manager was really proud. Inside out, she knew these people. I walked into this man's bedroom, and in the corner of his bedroom was a photograph, a black and white photograph of him in a football strip holding the FA Cup in a Manchester City football strip from the
Oh,
1950s.
wow.
This guy had won the FA Cup and had played for Manchester City.
Wow.
Nobody in that home knew that. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a football fan. Yeah, but I didn't know who he was. I had to look, I Googled him, and in 10 seconds I got the answer. And but that that's amazing. But nobody knew that. And the photos in the home, he didn't have any relatives or anything. So that's not personalized care. They didn't even know that. And that shocked me.
Yeah.
But their internal quality teams have rated that home as outstanding because the care plans were all personalized and the staff knew the kind of basics around. So it's digging deeper than that. And how many of us actually sit and talk to relatives about the person's life and their history? You know,
Mm.
they, we don't. We do it a little bit, but we don't do it all that well. And I'm generalizing because some of you guys will do that well, so apologies. But but you've got to get under the skin of those people and then make sure all the staff understand everything about it. And then you can start to deliver truly personalized care. And then you'll hit the nail on the head. Because going back to that footballer example, the moment the home did know that this guy was actually quite a famous footballer in his day, and the interactions with that guy suddenly went up like a rocket because everybody wanted to talk to him and they wanted to ask him about it, and their
Mm.
relatives wanted to ask him about it, and he became a little bit of a celebrity in the home. But
Mm.
before that, nobody was taking any notice of this chap. Yeah,
It's a very extreme example of having an FA Cup winner. But I think it really does go to the heart of health and care in general, which is that my personal view is the epitome of providing care with dignity and respect is, to your point, knowing who that person is and
yeah,
knowing who they are, their story, how that might influence how they're interacting, their behaviors, their you know things that might trigger them as well for
yeah.
like their different experiences, and to your point around how that then manifests in behaviors.
Yeah, yeah, because if you take like activities provision, okay, and I kind of hate that word myself, but in the absence of anything better for today, let's call it activities. Um, and but you can walk in a number of homes and you see really well organized activities. Yeah, okay, but everybody's doing the same thing, and I'm sat there going, well, I don't want to throw a ball around. If I was in this home, I don't really want to do chair gym exercises, but everybody's trying to do it. And if you don't do it, oh well, we'll do some one-to-one work with that person at another time. And I think one of the best examples I saw as an inspector of a provider that really nailed this is they understood that, and they actually brought in a cruise director. And they said, Anthony, if you think about it, if you're on a cruise ship with 4,000 people, right, and you've got 2 days at sea, you've got to do stuff that meets the needs of all those people, because they don't all want to run around a track. They don't want to all do drinking competitions. They don't all want to do napkin folding exercises or darts or ping pong or quoits or whatever. You have to do things that meet everybody's needs. And because if you don't, you'll have a riot on your ship for 2 days. So and that really hits home that in the hospitality industry, they think like that. They think, how can I give everybody an experience?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it is, because it's about, isn't it? It's about, I always use this example about, right, if I could fly to, I don't know, let's say we could fly to the Middle East, okay, and I could go and fly on a standard airline, okay, and I could pay £2,000 for my ticket in economy class, okay, or I could choose to fly with Emirates and pay £4,000 for my ticket in economy class. I'm getting there at the same time. I'm being flown by the same kind of trained pilots. I'm going at the same altitude. I'm going on the same type of aircraft. I'm not getting there any quicker. But what am I getting and what am I paying for? I'm paying for a different experience.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm getting. I'm getting the experience. And that's what the SAP is fundamentally about, is how are we giving our residents an experience every day that makes their life worth living in that home. And that's got to include people with all stages of dementia.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many, the rhetorical question for me and anybody else that runs a care company, in my view, is, do we actually provide those things for people with dementia? Do we provide them with an experience, or are we just trying to get them through a day at a time? And are we trying to get through it a day at a time, because they may have some complex behaviors and things? We don't actually think, what is triggering that behavior? What is the frustration? What is the person distressed about? Okay. And that goes back to that whole thing about, the experience, getting to know the person and doing stuff and interacting with them properly.
It also really reminds me, the way that you're describing it is the principles that underpin positive behavioural supports. And again, sort of thinking about some of the examples in other elements of supported living, and kind of, again, that really detailed and nuanced view of an individual to know what those triggers are that result in that behavior, and then don't do it. I in a previous life worked with people with autism and young people, and this person reacted really badly because they were forced to do something they didn't want to do. And it was like, that's not because they have a disability. That's because you forced a 16-year-old to do something they don't want to do. And I don't think that changes as you get older. I think it's a sort of doubling down that actually it's, again, about giving respect and valuing that person and what they like and what they don't like, which again, I'm sure that people do on this call. I'm really glad that we've touched on dementia, and I'm really glad that you've thrown some of these questions in, because we know that dementia affects a significant proportion of people receiving care in residential and nursing homes. I think it's something like up to 70% of care home residents are living with some form of dementia, whether it be mild cognitive impairment or mild to moderate dementia, and then obviously in advanced stages. The CQC's 2024 State of Care report reaffirmed that dementia is going to be a key lens through which care quality is being assessed, especially as services begin to rebound from this long period of post-pandemic disruption. And then there was also its recent Dementia Insight reports, where the CQC made clear that while many providers are committed to person-centered dementia care, there remains wide variation in how well that care is both delivered and evidence, which I think you've echoed actually in some of your comments and observations, and especially when it comes to meaningful activity, communication, and emotional well-being. So with that in mind, what with obviously in your view as an MD of a care home operator group, what do you think are the main obstacles to embedding and evidencing consistent dementia care? And how are your services working around them? What have you seen in your life as an inspector? And what kind of observations do you have for our audience today?
So, I think everything you've just said, Fee, about CQC's view and the state of care and stuff, absolutely, of course, it's factual, it's in the public domain, but I wonder how many people have actually read some of that stuff. And again, I doubt that people have, and that's no disrespect to it because people have just got so much to do. But it's really valuable that we do to understand in part how to answer that question. And I think, but let's just start right at the beginning, training. Okay, so I've got very strong views about training because I think that you know the regulator is largely to blame for this over the years, is that we've ended up in a situation that providers sometimes just buy training packages and train the staff, and then we can say to CQC we've got 85% of our staff trained and job done. Okay. But actually, if you read the regulation 18 about staffing, it actually says you've got to have skilled and competent staff. And competence doesn't necessarily mean just because you passed an e-learning, you're absolutely competent in what you're doing. So, and also I think that some of the dementia training, I have to be really honest, that I've seen on e-learning packages, it's okay, but it's not good enough. And I think that, and yeah, if you're in one of the really big providers, you can do all kinds of fancy training, and bring people in and all that kind of stuff. But the rest of us in the real world can't do that. So what we have to do is start looking at different ways of enhancing our staff knowledge of dementia, and that in a practical sense can give them the skills. Because again, going back to what I said about the art of conversation, I think there's a proportion of people who just shy away from trying to deal with people with dementia because they just don't know how to do it, and they're fearful of it, or they don't understand what triggers some of these behaviors that people may have. They don't understand that it might come from frustration, not actually, or pain, not actually because they've got dementia, and it's just because they can't. That's the only way they can express it. And so I think there's a whole raft of things that we need to do to upskill our staff with that. And I think actually, if we're going to be honest, and I'll be honest, is right at the top of organisations, do right at the top of the organisation understand it, and do they understand dementia properly? Because now we're seeing all kinds of different strands and approaches to dealing with dementia. We've got operators that are doing specialist dementia centres for which they're charging big premiums, where they bring in psychologists in and low stimulus environments. So the rummage boxes have gone, the dolls have gone, the live stations have gone, all those kind of things. And it's a very clinical environment that's low stimulus. Other providers are doing dolls and using dolls and therapy dolls and pets and animals and all that kind of stuff, a high stimulus environment. So we're getting different approaches now. So I think we have to try and get ahead of this and try and make sure that our team know how to talk to people, how to interact them without being fearful of it, but fundamentally, if every single person who's got dementia, we need to know them better, if anything, than our other residents. We need to know the whole thing about what makes them tick.
So what, so there's the training, there's the art of the conversation. If you think about when a person is first first comes into a care home, do you have a view on what that sort of that pathway should look like in terms of best practice?
Yeah, so when a person first moves in, I mean, if we're lucky, we've got a really good social work assessment or something, but obviously that varies considerably. Hopefully, we've been out and done an assessment, but again, that varies considerably, and more providers do assessments on the phone so they can get people in quicker, all that kind of stuff. And then we start to write the care plan. Okay, so and you still see providers that will move somebody into a home and they'll say we've got 21 days to write a care plan. Okay, 21 days. I mean, what we have to do, I'm afraid, and it's hard because it's hard juggling the finances to do this, particularly if you're in a small group or an individual care. We have to spend time with their relatives and that person to get to know them better before we get into the mechanics of writing page after page after page in a care plan that repeats the same thing over and over again. And even some of the care planning systems, they don't, the life history and the getting to know the person is not as detailed as it needs to be. So, and I know it's a tough one because of resources and time, but if we take time to know that person and get to know them inside out thoroughly, we will, it will save us time in the long run and save us an awful lot of resource in the long run. And that person will have a better life. And if they have a better life, we'll have better outcomes for them. And we'll get better regulatory outcomes as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think better regulatory outcomes is the ultimate result, isn't it? Because you'll be able to see how that then manifests those
And
efforts.
and our staff, for example, I often ask staff, okay, what does that person, how do they like to spend their day? What do they actually want to do? And well, I don't really know, but we've got bingo today. Okay, and actually, and my colleague Joe will remember that when we were at HC1, there was a gentleman we found out that actually all he wanted to do was go to the paper shop every day, like he'd done for the last 50 years. He'd walk to the paper shop every morning to get his paper, and all of a sudden we didn't know that, and then we did know that. We said can't do that. He's got dementia, and he might wander off. It's not safe, and we haven't got the staff to take it. So we put a GPS tracker, an air tag into his shoes. And so he could go every morning, and that changed that man's life. And that so and that really helped his dementia because
I was going to say, presumably being able to maintain an element of his routine, the fact that he knew that was part of his routine would reinforce
yeah,
it for him, so actually would improve his symptoms rather than
yeah,
destabilizing.
yeah, and it's like and this is perhaps more of a controversial view, but recently the VE Day celebrations, okay. So a lot of our homes did big VE parties, and they had the music on and they were reminiscing. Some people don't want to talk about the war. You know,
Hmm.
I've got a 93-year-old dad who's still terrified. He was, sort of 7, 8, 9 years old during the war, terrified if he hears an air raid siren because of
Hmm.
what that brought down to him and the fact that his whole street was bombed and he lost some of his family in one of those bombs. And he doesn't want any of that, but we just assume because they lived through the wartime period that they do. And and I think that's really interesting because, and I certainly saw some distressed behaviors during those kind of things because it brought back a whole set of memories that some people, it was very painful for them.
Yeah.
And they lost a lot of people and they lost their whole
Yeah.
lives. So yeah, so it goes back again to knowing people better. And then if we go back to that activities provision, it's about understanding that you know, people need different things to meet their needs. and that's a
What
real
sort of
challenge.
things?
So, some people will, if you take music, for example, we all know the effect of music can have, particularly people with all stages of dementia. And you'll have seen the famous YouTube videos and all that kind of stuff. But actually, people's musical tastes are varied massively. So it's about playlists that actually meet that person's choice, and and that matters, and again, and it is quite simple to do in the digital age. So again, if we're doing stuff with music, let's explore what music those people actually want to listen to. And you might be surprised that you suddenly find somebody, is actually a rocker and they want AC/DC, not Vera Lynn, but that makes a big difference to things. And structuring your activities around the needs of people is a challenge. But if you develop that structure and do it in such a way that you can engage a group, you can engage individuals, but it will make a huge difference to the outcomes for people.
And thanks, Anthony. And I think just, doubling back down on your point around, VE Day celebrations, which I think were done with the best intent. But I think you're right. Like my grandmother and both grandmothers who had dementia, they never ever talked about the war because it was painful. Like VE Day wasn't a celebration. It was a kind of, what have we just lived through? And I think there's
Absolutely.
that kind of being mindful that what is kind of a date in the diary for those of us who aren't war generation may actually be incredibly triggering for those that are.
Mm.
I'm really conscious we're now getting up to quarter two, and I do want to give a bit of time for our lovely audience today to ask some questions. Just a reminder to use the chat, or we can put hands up at the end and we can try and get through as many. But I would really like to kind of end with some really practical takeaways. What you've heard already is watch, listen, smell. The art of conversation, the art of smiling, and the importance of really getting to know individuals in order to be able to give them the best quality care and the best quality of experience that is fitting for someone who has been around and has a life and has experiences that impact their day-to-day now, even if we can't necessarily see it. For any providers who are listening in right now who may not have been assessed under the SAF or who have an upcoming inspection and have listened to what you've said with great interest, but now feel overwhelmed, where would you suggest that they start?
I So firstly, if you're just going back to the SAP itself, make sure you've read the quality statements and the evidence that sits below them. It's really important, okay, because it's a bit like, taking an A level in French and you've not done the right syllabus, or you've done, A level in English and you haven't read the right books, so you've got to understand the syllabus. And I always was amazed as an inspector how many people didn't actually read the inspection methodology, which is there for all to see on the CQC website. So it's not a kind of mystic art. So really familiarize yourself with that. And I think about things, right, that the key pillars that you're going to be assessed upon are people's experience, and that's going to be evidenced through their feedback, their relatives' feedback, stakeholder feedback about the experience that they're having in that home. And the experience isn't just the quality of the food. It isn't just how nice their room is, or does your care home look like a Premier Inn, or is it kind of one of the older kind of care homes? It's none of that. It's actually, does that person have a meaningful life every day? And that's what it actually means, and that's what meaningful interaction means. So if and I'd role play it back with the team. If you were sat there like that lady there today for 2 hours, how would you feel? And I think that's quite powerful. Obviously, with the staff, you've got to keep your processes going. You've got to do your auditing and all that kind of stuff. And just one kind of final thing about the SAF that we haven't covered today, because it's not what we were talking about, is learning is key. So in the old inspection methodology, learning was mentioned twice. It's mentioned 54 times in this app.
Wow, really? So it's gone from 2
Deliberately,
times to 54.
deliberately, because everything that goes wrong, everything that goes right in a home, we've got to learn from.
Mm,
And if you're a provider in multiple sites, you've got an opportunity to learn across multiple sites. So, think about introducing learning meetings. We've done that. We've scrapped a load of other meetings. We do learning meetings. And then you can, in that learning, so if you've got incidents around dementia residents, for example, because they're deliberate, for example, if they're displaying some stress or distress behaviors, you could use that learning meeting to understand why and actually go back to, well, it's because we didn't understand that person's needs, or they're frustrated by this, or they've had a boring day and all that kind of stuff. And then you can start to improve all of that
mm.
and use the SAF to improve those things. Don't just use it to get through as a tick box exercise.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to one of the first points we were talking about, which is that culture. It was interesting. I think it was Virginia Mason in the States that had a really poor incident reporting culture.
Mm.
And then they introduced a new way of working that really encouraged and like
Yeah,
activated this culture of reporting. Their quality shot up as a
yeah.
result. But part of that was because it didn't establish a blame culture and
Well,
people felt safe to raise worries and concerns.
yeah, and in the UAE, they have excellence reporting. And so they don't report on the negative unless it's really serious. They only report on excellence.
Yeah,
And
that's
they drive their
interesting.
quality. Their social care system is based upon excellence reporting. And they drive their quality improvement and learning from what goes really, really well. And they firmly argue that they get better quality outcomes by doing that. We can't do that because our regulator won't allow to do that. But actually, all of us, and I'm very guilty of it every day, look at the negative incident stuff. I don't look at the positive stuff, and 95% of everything we do will be incredibly positive. And
There is probably another webinar in this topic, I think, around use of language and how language engenders good behaviours or
yeah.
potentially compounds negative behaviours. What are a couple of practical low lift actions that providers can take to boost their evidence base before their next inspection, do you think?
So go back to what I said at the beginning of the webinar. Think about doing some observational work. Okay. I'm more than happy to share our observational tool that it's not rocket science, but you can just devise your own and simple spreadsheet or Word document that just says between 10 and 10:30, I observed these 5 people, A, B, C, D, E, and this is their mood, and this is how many times people interacted with them, and did their mood change or not. And discount task interactions like delivering a meal or whatever, but just general interactions, and that will build you a significant evidence base about. And because as I said, you'll be surprised because it certainly is a shock sometimes.
Mm.
And also it can be a very positive surprise as well. But then that enables you to do work with that staff team and understand their barriers to doing activity. It might be time, it might be the number of them, or it might just be that because they're not viewing the resident as a person anymore, it's because it's part of their jobs. You know what I mean? So it's a bit like I guess if you work in an office, a large office, for example, and you see somebody every day, or a group of people every day, sometimes you walk past them in the corridor and you might not say anything to them
Mm.
because you just see them all the time. And
Yeah.
that's
And you
that's
think
how
you
it can
know
be with
them.
staff and
Yeah.
residents.
Yeah. And actually it's nothing more than you just know the person. It's not even a casual acquaintance.
Yeah.
Um, And I think it's very important, actually, in terms of what you're saying around that observation, how that feeds into the learning. because obviously then you're able to say, well, we observed, and as a result of that, we learned X, Y, Z, and then we did this. I think that's some really practical advice that I'm sure for those of us who are preparing for inspections will have a bit of a think about. I just want to finally do a quick zoom out. Do you think the current CQC, it sounds like it does, but I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Do you think the current CQC direction supports innovation in dementia care, or is there more work to do to create space for it because providers are just trying to get their heads around the framework, meet the framework, or do you think actually it's cultivating that space?
I think there is room in the framework to demonstrate innovative practice. I think the reality is, as you described, is that if you're a small to medium-sized provider, you're just trying to get through this, and you're just trying to get through, dealing with dementia. As I said, some of the bigger providers are going all in, and some of you may be on this call with specialist dementia centres with a particular approach, and they're going there because it can attract very significant fee premiums. But the rest of us are just trying to survive, I think. But there's always room for innovation, and I think it's about how we partner with resources that are available to us to enable us to do that. Because I haven't got the answer. I need a partner, whatever that is and whoever it is, to give me a structure to work within. Because I can't do it on my own, and I haven't got the resources to go out and commission a whole work around a whole dementia strategy for my company. I need the resources that are provided that I may have to pay for to provide that structure for me.
Really, really helpful. Thank you so much. I am going to stop there and ask the people who have been very patient and our audience to turn your cameras back on. I don't think that people have been using the chat to ask questions, but I would at this point love to see if there are any questions. And if you just want to pop your hand up, or if you do want to put it in the chat, and I will ask, it's entirely up to you. I can see Jason typing. I don't want to put you under any pressure, Jason. And Joe, you've turned your camera on.
I don't have any questions.
Just trying to say hello again.
Yeah, absolutely.
She was trying to worry me. That's what she was trying to do.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I'm going to chat, Fiona, because I can chat quicker than I can type.
Absolutely. We welcome that, because then you don't have to listen to me talking.
Yeah. It was just to say, where I work, we've commenced with individualised life storyboards for each resident, just as a way of staff getting to know the key important things about individual residents to help build those relationships up. Therefore, when they're going in supporting with any care aspects, they can use that as an opportunity to make those discussions less distressing and more meaningful. And they've had a really positive impact.
Yeah, I suspect it will, and that's fantastic. I mean, that's really good evidence for that kind of stuff. And as you were speaking, Jason, I was kind of reminding myself about some providers I've seen. They do things like say to the staff in the morning handover or something, or whatever you do, flash meeting, whatever, and just say, go and find 3 facts about that resident today. Each of you find 3 facts and bring it back. And so, or they do quizzes about individual residents, and some of you will do resident of the day programs, and we might make a bit of fuss about the resident, and we might do a deep clean of the room and all that kind of stuff. But actually, let's get the staff to really use the resident of the day to find out much more about that resident. And
I get resident of the day, and I see the purpose of it. But it should be resident of the day for every resident every day.
I couldn't agree more. And I totally agree. But there's loads of different ways, isn't there, getting to know the resident. But you're right, and it can't be just the staff team that I'll give you an example. A home that I was involved in the acquisition of, went in there, and we started working about how you do your care planning, and I read this care plan, and I didn't recognize the staff person's name, and I said to the the senior person. I said, well, who's that? Because that's not one of your carers. So no, it's the kitchen assistant. And the kitchen assistant had written the care plan because the kitchen assistant knew the resident the best. And it was a fantastic care plan. It wasn't clinical. It was just, but the other kind of needs were just, and that kind of, I mean, that's extreme example again, and providers might not want to do that, but that hits it home actually, you know, that people can write fantastic care plans if they know the resident really, really well.
Absolutely. That's actually lovely. The idea that they knew the residents so well that they were responsible for developing the care plan, because they knew them so well. I think that's really lovely, actually. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't want to put anyone on the spot. No? No? Okay. Devika, did you have a question?
No, just I think that was really helpful and really amazing. I really liked the anecdote about the football player. I think it was incredible. But yeah, I really just fully believe in this value of person-centered care and the little things that you can do. And just the stuff that we're seeing from the work that we're doing around CST in the care homes is just instrumentally changing lives. And it's such a simple evidence-based activity, but at the core of it is it goes back to what you're saying, Anthony, and what this whole thing has been around, which is utilizing moments to really engage in conversation, because it's the conversations that can instrumentally change people's lives. And there are simple ways that you can embed those into activities to significantly improve outcomes, but actually at the end of it, just people. So yeah, I absolutely loved it, and I really think that conversation was brilliant, so thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing. Well, if there's no more questions, I will give you back a minute to your hour. But thank you so much for joining us. The one thing that I'm probably going to think about for the rest of the day is watch, listen and smell. But I'm really very grateful to all of you for joining us today. We will make the recording available, and this is going to form a bit of a series actually of these sorts of conversations that sort of starts to unpack some of this as the CQC starts to reboot again after a bit of a lull, but also thinking about some of the other issues affecting the care space. So thinking about the NHS and what's going on with the 10-year plan, how that will inform dementia provision, what that means for care homes, some of the challenges around workforce and what that means for day-to-day activities. There's a lot to unpack. So hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day and a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.